In a race against time, German police are scouring the scrublands of Praia de Luz in Portugal. Their hope is this barren landscape will give up something, anything, of Madeleine McCann, the 3-year-old British girl who vanished from near here 18 years ago.
Well, in spite of these efforts to find something, anything of Madeleine McCann, they found nothing. In this analysis, I will try to add to the body of knowledge we know about in this case, as well as make suggestions about where to make a strategic, targeted search for Madeleine. Yes, in the sea.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. What we'll be focusing our attention on isn't who or when, but simply where. And so I will be drawing your attention in part to how a particular hypothesis has been derived, and you are welcome to identify flaws or outright holes in this hypothesis, because that's all it is, a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a tentative explanation for an observation or a phenomenon, a specific testable prediction about what will happen in a study, or an educated guess based on prior knowledge.
Provided your thesis is correct.
Provided it's correct. It's good.
That's why they call it a thesis, Doctor.
But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Are you subscribed? Make sure you are. Hit the notification bell. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, compelling, important, interesting, please do hit the thanks button. If you've never hit the thanks button, please consider doing so. And let's get started. In this analysis, I want to deal with how to come up with a targeted search via 3 dimensions. A, intertextual, B, intuitive, and C, scientific. The latter involving actually going to the area, which is what I did, walking, hiking, and driving around the coast, looking and testing out this thesis and fine-tuning it based on boots-on-the-ground observation to fully synthesize your theory. This isn't based on just 3 days on the ground. It's based on weeks on the ground and months, if not years, learning, reading up, researching this case.
If there is no forensic evidence to be found, it's likely, within months, this man, convicted pedophile, rapist, and prime suspect Christian Bruckner, will walk free.
Did you kidnap and kill Madeleine McCann, Mr. Bruckner?
Now you'll notice in the way we are testing this thesis, we are dealing with it from a very broad perspective, which is intertextual, to a narrower perspective, but still kind of fuzzy, which is intuitive, and then very specific, very targeted. And we use this scientific approach to try to attain pinpoint precision, or the closest we can get to that. Now, if you've been following my coverage, you'll know that, first of all, I don't believe Madeleine is still alive, and I have my doubts that Madeleine, if she is deceased, is anywhere on land. Well, how can we be sure that these original assumptions are correct? Well, there is supporting evidence, including evidence quoted by the European Court of Human Rights as recently as 2022, that's barely 3 years ago, to suggest that Madeleine is no longer alive. It is not the ambit of this analysis to review those details. This analysis is a fairly original hypothesis, as far as I know, regarding where the child's body may have been disposed. And we begin our analysis using the broadest of perspectives, which is A, intertextualities. We begin by looking at contextual issues underlying the calculus of water searches. And if you think we're starting very, very broadly, that's exactly what we are doing. Number 1, watery grave intertextualities. Now, I have seen commentary trying to head off any discussion about a watery grave. Let's not talk about it. Let's not think about it. And, most of the time it is true. Disposing of a body in water is 9 times out of 10 a terrible idea. True. Especially in the sea, because almost inevitably, after a period of time, a body will simply wash ashore. We saw that in the Scott Peterson case, and I wrote 3 books on that case. So I'm well aware of Peterson's attempts to weigh down his wife's body, and guess what? It washed ashore regardless. And I've actually been boots on the ground in San Francisco Bay as well. Then there's Robert Durst, who dismembered his neighbor, Morris Black. Then he went to nearby Galveston Bay, dumped his remains into the bay, only for it to immediately wash back up. The victim's head, however, was never found. But there are cases where people go missing at sea and their remains are never found, such as Natalie Holloway on May 30th, 2005, almost 2 years before Madeleine, and more recently, 20-year-old University of Pittsburgh junior Sudiksha Konanki, who went missing in the sea in the Dominican Republic in early March this year. It's more than 3 months later, and her body was never recovered, and within 2 weeks her parents had her declared deceased. The Kylie Rodney case in Prosser Lake in California is another case that I think reveals just how tricky and challenging disappearances in water can be, even when there is a very limited body of water to search, and even a ping showing virtually where the vehicle went in. Nicola Bulley in the UK is another of many examples of how long it can take to find someone missing in water, just how tricky it is doing a search in water, even after thorough searches using state-of-the-art equipment. And that brings us to number 2. If a vehicle was used, the search is made vastly easier, not harder. And of course, this is in the context of a vehicle being used to dispose of a body in water. As we saw in the Scott Peterson and Kylie Rodney cases, finding a missing person when a vehicle is involved simplifies the process greatly. In Peterson's case, his vehicle was seen near Berkeley Marina, and also targeted searches in the area still produced nothing, when 2 bodies washed ashore 3 months later following a spring thunderstorm barely a mile from that marina and about the same distance from Brooks Island, where it's believed Peterson dumped the bodies. He used that island as a visual shield in terms of line of sight, in terms of the people living along the periphery of the bay. In Kylie Rodney's case, if one simply followed the direction that her vehicle took and intuited a missed turn in the dark, that's where she would have been found, and that's where she was found, later confirmed by video recorded on the night in question from a local fire tower. In other words, if a vehicle was involved in the disposal of human remains in this case, and some evidence appears to support that hypothesis, and if the remains were more probably dumped in the sea, then one simply has to identify areas where coastal roads and assumed dumping sites intersect. Does that make sense?
I think everyone desperately wants there to be a positive outcome from this. No one wants this to be a wasted effort.
Former head of the Missing Children Unit at the UK National Crime Agency, Charlie Hedges, says despite the lost years, the case is on a knife's edge.
Can you see how, even taking this ultra-broad approach, we are suddenly thinking about this case in a very strategic way? And certainly in theory, hypothetically, we can narrow down the areas we want to search. We can pinpoint them on a map already at this early stage. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've gone through the first dimension of this approach. We're going to follow it by the intuitive approach, which is the next level, which, believe it or not, actually, at least theoretically, could narrow the search even further. But I see we near the 10-minute mark, so I'm not going to take it further than that. Look out for the next video in this series dealing with the intuitive approach. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.